Lis is a remarkable building in so many ways. And of course, Utzon was a remarkable architect. Lis is a building, I think, that could only have been designed by a super confident, mature architect, because it challenges so many of the orthodoxies that constrain so many of the other modern masterpieces. I guess it's like a piece of music that is part scored, but part improvised, full of inflection and nuances, and so much more interesting than a constrained mid-century modern masterpiece that plays by the rules. Utzon knew how to reinvent rules and then break those reinvented rules. And Lis is a building that the more you look at, the more elusive and fascinating it gets. Coming to Mallorca to understand the story of this house also means we've had to look at the context, the local towns, the materials, the people, and so on, to really see where Lis came from. This film is that story. When I arrived at Lis, I hadn't expected the landscape to be anything like the landscape around Sydney. And yet for me, it was. I mean, I thought of Mallorca as a mountainous place. It's in southern Europe, and in my mind, nothing like an Antipodean southern hemisphere landscape. But those cliffs in Mallorca are so like the cliffs in Sydney. And in some ways, there's a theme in Utzon's work where a building is on a plinth or is a piece of landscape. And I think the Opera House and Lis are both plinths with buildings. But the Opera House is very much a manufactured plinth, which is placed in such a way that it projects out into the water, and then there's some roofs that are placed on it. The plinth that Lis is on is the cliff that sits there, and it's almost like a piece of that cliff has just been pulled up to make the building. The building comes out of the ground in a very, very different way from the Opera House. Two buildings, very, very similar, and yet very, very different.
Hola. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Piers. Wow, I love the expansiveness of this after the intimate way that you arrive and you discover how to get in, and it's all quite contained and still. And here, just how big this feels, the view and the generosity of this place, this room that we're in. Is an outdoor space, but it is a room, isn't it?
Este espacio, que por contraste con los otros espacios, que son más pequeños, se abre entre un muro y la vegetación. Este espacio va ligado con la cocina, y esta era la mesa de comedor que está protegida hasta las 2 de mediodía. Por lo tanto, la hora oportuna para comer es sobre esa hora. Y a partir de aquí, disfrutar de este tiempo de invierno, otoño y primavera.
There's a tendency now to think of villas, which this is really, as completely detached from their context. They're in a little compound almost with a wall around them. But this house is very private to the road. And yet these spaces, these in-between spaces, really do speak of the local towns here that are tiny
in scale. Some of the spaces, some of the streets designed just for one person or one animal. The noise of the sea is really particular when you face it, and particularly southwest-facing seas in the Mediterranean. And what's unexpected is the wind in the pines. And it's almost sea-like, but not quite. But it really ramps up this sense of atmosphere and this sense of being connected to nature even more. This is the main living room, and it's a really unusual space. It's an unusual proportion. It's really tall and not that big. And there's a very particular place that you're invited to sit, which is skewed slightly southwesterly. But of course, these deep reveals are what makes this room. And nowadays, I think most people would just have a wall of glass, and seeing all of the view all of the time is really boring. But to make 5 places that you can see different bits of the view, and then making the reveals 2 meters deep and skewing them, that's really special, really unusual. And it makes the most amazing atmosphere, because now, early afternoon, the sun is coming in, and you see through this reveal that faces southwest, this light coming in, and you see up the top, there's a tiny fragment, there's almost a slit window, like in a cathedral, where that's designed just to wash the texture of that wall in light. And when I look now at buildings that people like Peter Zumthor have done, and they talk about atmosphere, this room is almost overwhelming just in the terms of the atmosphere that it gives you. And the atmosphere just because of the light, the material, and the space. I think I'm drawn to these very deep reveals, much as Utzon, I think, was. So I'm sitting in one of these reveals at the moment, and these reveals are defined by their scale, and they're really human scale. They're about the size of somebody standing up, they're a person. But I love the way that the furniture is pushed into them. So this has a table that fits this reveal perfectly. I think this is probably my favorite space in the house. It's so immersive. I mean, the sea, the way the pines filter the view and in a way soften the horizon. You know, they dance up through that linear horizon. And then just the generosity of these pieces of furniture that are built in again. I mean, the single bench, the 2 tables, it's sort of unusual. Why would you arrange furniture like that? And yet it works. It is where you want to sit and draw up a more informal chair one side.
Estos son los espacios más bonitos, creo que de la casa, y que Utzon tiene un dibujo muy bonito en el que él está, en cierta manera, se hace un autorretrato, desayunando, donde ves la mano, el pie, la fecha en la que está haciendo el dibujo y desayunando enfrente del mar. Yo creo que es el mejor espacio porque es como la esquina del edificio, ¿no? Es el límite de la arquitectura. A partir de este límite de arquitectura empieza la naturaleza. Los árboles, la tierra, la piedra y el mar.
It also makes me think that there isn't really even much of a house here. And most contemporary buildings are things that you can carry the object with you in your mind, and you can draw the object. This is never an object. It always disappears. It always recedes into the background. And the purpose of the object is to allow you to be placed in landscape and experience landscape or light or view. And the house always recedes. It's a very modest house.
Una de las características más importantes de la casa es que los 5 volúmenes están separados entre ellos. Esta condición hace que te obligue o te condicione de una manera de vivir muy concreta. Por ejemplo, el hecho de ir de una estancia a otra, te obliga a salir al exterior y ponerte en contacto con las condiciones meteorológicas de ese momento.
Yo creo que la obra de Utzon en Mallorca posiblemente es la obra que intenta tener más referencias con arquitecturas y arquitectos que las otras obras. En este caso, sus referencias acaban siendo todas las construcciones que hay alrededor de Santanyí, que sobre todo está el trabajo de hacer pequeñas edificaciones con marés. Yo creo que hay esa intención de reconocer que al final, cuando llegas a un territorio, lo primero que tienes que hacer es conocer esa cultura. Y la cultura arquitectónica va ligada a unos recursos locales y a unas técnicas de utilizar ese material con las personas que trabajas. Entonces yo creo que sí que aquí hubo como una aproximación poco a poco, porque los primeros proyectos sí que eran difíciles construirlos con materiales locales, pero a medida que el proyecto va avanzando en versiones, vas viendo como si la cultura mallorquina empieza a entrar en los proyectos. Por tanto, yo creo que es posiblemente Utzon en Mallorca, es quizás el Utzon más referenciado con arquitecturas en arquitectos. Porque Mallorca en ese momento tenía unos recursos, unos materiales y unas técnicas. Y Utzon se dejó absorber.
After 20 years of being here in Lis, Utzon tired, I think, of the storms that came in. As he was getting older, he found them unrelenting. And it's tempting to think on a beautiful day like this, you could live here and just get on looking out to sea and the weather's always calm. But it gets incredibly stormy, and particularly in winter. And this space is a winter garden. It's a protected space with a north wall and a wall to the east, because the weather drives in from there in winter. And this is where they would sit and have dinner in winter, where they could just be protected from the cold winds and the storms that came in, but still have these beautiful fragments of the view. I wondered when I first came in, when the sun wasn't out, why this was a semicircle. And of course, you sit there and you look at the view. And then I wondered about the relationship to this cutout. And of course, coming here now, late in the morning, when the sun isn't quite due south, I see that there is this beautiful semicircle on the ground, which sort of matches this. And again, Utzon, always sort of one step ahead, always playing with things, introducing ideas from the cosmos, or from architectural history, or from modernism, or just from the local vernacular in the form of these tiles and the material. And here, it all comes together. This is an edge space. The center is open. It's ambiguous. It's sort of flexible space that you could use for many things. You could do yoga there. You could put a table out there. But these pergola spaces around the edge, where you can just ease yourself into a bit of shade if you want it, or a bit of sun if you want it. The sort of more ambiguous spaces are special and subtle. And this is a one-sided table. It's round this side, and the other side discourages you from sitting there, because of course you want to sit here and you want to look at the view. And actually the southwest view is, in my mind, the best view. Rather than just looking out to sea, you look southwest, you see the sun change. And I like that it's a long linear table, which shows in a way you can get comfortable, but just not too comfortable. Now that I've spent a bit of time here, I love this building even more, and I respect Utzon even more. I think one of the tyrannies of contemporary architecture, particularly modernism, is that it's so fixed, it's so finite, it's so static, you can't control it, it's so rigid, it's so ordered, it's so clinical, it's so unhuman. This house is so human, and the things I like most about it aren't the things that are super resolved, because of course the house is beautifully resolved. And in many ways, I feel that lots of architects can resolve things. That's kind of what they do. They line things up and things get resolved. But when I look at things like this window and I see the frame that crosses over a beam, you think, did Utzon
design it like that? Did he add it afterwards? Was it a bit of a fudge? And if it was a bit of a fudge, I like that more because it reminds me that buildings like this are often experiments and they often draw on how buildings are made locally. The buildings in Mallorca that are made without architects are sort of beautiful fudges where they've just tried things out without a sense that something needs to be fixed and photographed and frozen like that forever. And maybe they moved in without the glass and maybe they then had to add it. And when I look at it, I love the ambiguity or the inscrutability of it. And when I look at old buildings, I see things that are inscrutable. They don't start at a fixed time, they don't end at a fixed time. They change and they're adapted. And it isn't just the window that I love. As I look around, I see the additions that Utzon put onto this building much later, 20 years after the building was built, because it had to deal with waterproofing. And as Utzon got older, he cared less about the fixed initial idea, and he adapted it by putting a small eaves on the building. There's a roof that runs around that sheds water and makes it perform a lot better. And again, I love that the building is layered with time. As I look at this, I see Utzon getting older and becoming more human. And I see the building getting older and becoming even more human.
Utzon grew up in the Northern Hemisphere and in Northern Europe, which is a really distinct climate. It's quite harsh, it's cold, with long winters, and there's a type of architecture that is in some ways quite controlled, that has grown out of that kind of Scandinavian modernism. When Utzon went to Mallorca for the first time in the 50s, it must have been completely liberating because it was warm, it was relaxed, and another world opened up for Utzon. And he carried that world with him for many years before he came back to Mallorca after the Opera House and built Can Lis.
It's market day, so it's a little bit noisy, but I love the bustle of days like this in towns like this that are really typical of Southern Europe. And Utzon, coming from Northern Europe, would have been, I guess, beguiled by places like this. And partly, of course, because of what happens here, people coming together, sharing things, passing time of day, having coffee, but also because of the way that places like this have used materials for hundreds or thousands of years. And this whole town is a case study in this local Mahez stone. And this is the best quality stone. And you can tell it's the best quality by the fineness of the joint. And it is also perhaps the most durable cut because this hasn't aged that much. These textures are so beautiful. And I love to think of Utzon coming here and carrying this place with him when he was working on the Opera House, which is a completely different context. I mean, it's the scale of a city. And this is so human. And he was, of course, steeped in Scandinavian modernism. And I think he was wrestling with how to make modernism more human. And I think seeing things like this, which are shutters that he did incorporate in Can Lis, reminds me of how hard it was to work in a context of modernism where there was a culture of precision in the machine. And the question for architects was, how do we incorporate the hand, the human, the artisan, the rural, the local in all of that stuff? There's some answers here. And of course, we can see how Utzon took this and used it in Can Lis.
Esta persiana es la que encontramos en todas las casas de Mallorca. Incluso el plano del perfil coincide con el de la dama. Y lo que permite la persiana, como en todo el clima mediterráneo, es adaptar a las diferentes estaciones, sí. O sea, lo que permite, por ejemplo, que en invierno podamos tener abierto y que el sol entre en la vivienda, y en verano cerrar la puerta interior y tener esta persiana que nos protege del sol, pero entre el aire. Y la luz entra rebotada de abajo, entra la luz por aquí y nos ilumina desde el techo.
This is the rough joint I was referring to that Utzon used at Can Lis. So in the church, we've seen the super tight joint that's expensive. Here, same stone, but smudged joint, which is a combination of economy here, but also just for Utzon, enjoying the kind of texture of the artisanal hand. This is the stone that just would have been taken from the ground and piled up, and this from a quarry. But stone everywhere.
Hola, Sebastián. ¿Cómo estás? Hola. ¿Cómo estás?
This is incredible. I've never seen a place like this. And I just want to know, how do you extract the stone so beautifully, so precisely into what feels like a piece of art?
Mira, la base principal del clot de marès és arrencar, és la partida. La base és posar totalment a nivell ben pla per poder treballar en el nivell ben pla. Si per un motiu o per l'altre fallam en els nivells, les peces ja no te surten en les escaires així com toquen. Així que la base fundamental és totalment pla. Antes de començar a treure, i llavors poder relletar i gruix, se'n va baixant i baixant i baixant. I depèn de les dimensions del clot, a lo millor cada mes traiem un forro.
Un forro és
Una capa. Una capa de 40 centímetres. I així, mes a mes, i per endins, i per endins. I esperant que la qualitat sigui bona, o deixem el clot, una de dues.
I think what makes it more beautiful is that it's all the same size. Why is it all this size?
La dimensión de la pieza es para comodidad de un trabajador. Es decir, está todo estudiado. 40 por 40 por 80 de alto, según la calidad del marés podemos aprovechar 2 piezas de 20 con un bloque, 3 piezas de 13 en el mismo bloque. Está todo estudiado. Es decir, para cortar para 10, sacamos 4 piezas por bloque.
It feels so soft. I mean, this feels just, it's so soft. Can you tell me about its properties, what it's like? You cut it with a saw, or is it a nice stone to work with?
La calidad del marés la seleccionamos nosotros aquí, en el bollo. Antes de llevar a la nave de corte, seleccionamos aquí por calidad de sonido. Según el sonido, si hace un sonido más agudo, es mucho más resistente. Sirve para cortar de distintas dimensiones. Si es material flojo, solo sirve para venta, para nada más.
Can I hear the sound here? You can show me.
Diez.
Yeah.
4 cortes. Calidad por el sonido.
Yeah.
No hay más.
Can I have a go?
Vente.
This one?
Diez.
So last question, how many years to get from the top to the bottom?
Això, més o menys, han tardat uns 5-6 anys per poder baixar tota l'altura, fins a aquest nivell.
Una de las características de Mallorca es la importancia de la piedra. Si hablamos geológicamente, Mallorca está constituida, por un lado, por una sierra, la Tramuntana, y unas montañas en Levante y en sur, y que se conformaron hace 300 millones de años. Y la piedra que lo construye es una piedra calcárea. Posteriormente, entre estas grandes montañas, se fueron depositando digamos, todo lo que es el sedimento de conchas, creando esta gran plataforma de mares que acaba de dar la figura y el perímetro de la isla y que se conformó hace 3 millones de años.
Estamos en un espacio donde se ve claramente la formación de lo que hoy llamamos unas canteras de una piedra que en Mallorca se conoce con el nombre de marés. El nombre de marés ya nos introduce, o sea, la misma terminología, el mismo nombre, ya nos está diciendo que es un origen marino. Y efectivamente es así, porque, diríamos, dicho de una manera, digamos, simple, las canteras de marés no son más que fragmentos de arenas fósiles o de playas fósiles, si queremos llamarlo así, ¿no? De hecho, si tocamos el material, veremos que es una arenisca. Está formado por una arena pues, muy compactada, solidificada, y eso es realmente lo que son hoy en día las canteras de mares, ese tipo de playas, ¿no?
Como veis, se ve claramente dónde está la vegetación. Tenemos una capa vegetal de aproximadamente entre 10 y 20 centímetros y ya viene la placa de marés. Bueno, la sesión geológica es clarísima, con lo cual se hacían estas catas. Posiblemente veían que empezaban a hacerse los cortes en la plataforma, como podemos ver en ese primer corte que terminaba en ese plano de ahí.
En Mallorca he contabilizado unas 1000 canteras. Y estas 1000 canteras tienen como una repercusión también de esa implicación de que culturalmente el paisaje está construido por este marés.
Claro, por estas canteras que se han ido produciendo a lo largo de toda la historia.
Sí, que podemos ir desde las canteras que posiblemente debieron de estar los talaióticos, romanos, árabes, claro, las construcciones de las iglesias, la catedral, incluso todo el boom turístico del siglo XX.
Claro, por tanto tenemos que este material, además de ser un material de bajo impacto, ¿no?, que reduce las emisiones alrededor de un 60% comparado si utilizas, por ejemplo, con un material en que tengas que cocer la piedra y convertirlo en polvo, además tienes esa condición cultural que es que le ha dado la forma al territorio en el que vivimos.
I mean, it's the same as eating as well. You know, I don't want to eat beans from Africa that have flown in. And, you know, if I come here, I want to eat what's seasonal now. And in winter, I don't want to eat things that don't grow, you know. And yet the culture that we have in architecture and in food is that you have everything all the time from everywhere. Actually, we don't want that, you know. I don't want that. I'm sure you don't want that. You know, we want to know where we are in the cycle of the season, and we want to know where we are in the world.
Cuando nos hemos enfrentado a construir en esta isla, el acceso a los materiales tiene una limitación por unas condiciones de transporte y unas condiciones que no todo llega, y creo que esto te acaba acercando a mirar más qué es lo que tiende a la base, ¿no? Y esto es lo que hace que la arquitectura que se acaba haciendo en las islas acabe estando más ligada al lugar,
a los materiales locales.
Porque hay una dificultad de coger otro tipo de materiales, ¿no? Nosotros que tenemos un despacho que está en Barcelona, cuando hemos trabajado aquí, nos hemos visto obligados a mirar un poco más cuáles eran los recursos locales, ¿no? Que luego, cuando hemos vuelto a Barcelona, nos ha interesado llevar también más esa mirada más local, ¿no?
Tell me what this place is. I mean, it feels more like a piece of landscape than a building.
Esto es muy importante porque realmente las primeras poblaciones de talaióticos se colocaron en las montañas, encima de las montañas, para tener un control sobre todo el territorio. Y sobre este territorio se constituía por una serie de viviendas, y estas viviendas acaban teniendo sus edificaciones principales y salas comunes.
I'm really interested in this idea that you just take the material from the land and use it directly. I mean, pre-industrial revolution, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, all we did was take the material and make buildings from it. And in a way, when we look at buildings, we see the earth, we see the landscape, we see the stone, we see what's below the ground, and then everything changed. But here, it just seems so fundamental to this place that you took something from the landscape and you used it to make a building. Wow, that's quite an entrance. I mean, what an amazing space. And the scale of these stones, again.
Y se nota que ese es el espacio común, el más importante de todos para construir el edificio. Este gran pilar denota que la importancia de que es el espacio de todas las personas.
A mí me gustaba el marés porque lo conocía y me gustaba. Sabía cómo se sacaba, las medidas, sabía cómo se manejaba, porque lo había vivido de joven arquitecto. El marés, por ejemplo, esta cercanía con los materiales me importa mucho y creo que debe hacerse algo para que vuelva.
Sí.
Es decir, para ti,
pero bueno,
el movimiento moderno no tiene que ser incompatible con la tradición. No tiene por qué.
En absoluto.
O sea, sí al movimiento moderno, pero
al
lenguaje moderno, pero no separarlo de la autosuficiencia, de la autoconstrucción.
Lo moderno va a ser esto.
Sí.
Es que lo moderno es esto, Tani.
Sydney Opera House is the kind of building that a young architect who had won the most important commission of their career, wanting to put all of their ideas that they would ever have into one building. And it's layered and it's layered and it's layered. And in some ways very tightly controlled. Nothing is left to chance. Can Lis is a completely different type of building. It's a building by a much more mature architect who had got so much out of his system with the Opera House. It's a very relaxed building for a building that is quite ordered. And there's something about it that makes me, I guess, embrace this sense of getting older and trusting that you can be far less controlling as a designer and you can use instinct far more and you can embrace local traditions and local craft without those words threatening the core of your identity as a modern architect. At Can Lis, Utzon really just let go a little and looked around and enjoyed the place and drew the building out of the constraints of the place. He just looked at what was around him and touched it and moved it up into something that resembles Can Lis. And that's an incredibly beautiful and poetic thing to do.
When I think of Utzon and all of his work, what I see is an environmental sensibility.
Yeah, when he talks about the influence, his father, one thing is craftsmanship, another thing is a way of being. And he talked about the importance of knowing that there's certain things that you can't learn from books, that you have to kind of see for yourself. So this sort of experiential approach to life and architecture came from here.
I mean, when I think of the architects I know in Sydney who knew Utzon, they talk about that sensibility and they talk about how when you're on a boat, judging and feeling what the wind is doing and what the waves are doing, what the water's doing, is a very particular way of knowing. Again, that isn't something you get from books. And Mallorca is such a different world from this. I mean, what do you think drew him there other than that sensory world?
I mean, in all of the places that he's lived, and in most of the places that he's built, if there's not the proximity to water, there's the proximity to a natural landscape. And I think that's kind of like the most important key to understanding where he situated himself.
Yeah.
But then for sure, he loved a warmer climate.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, after Sydney, he went to Hawaii before he came to Mallorca. And so water and the warmth and just the lifestyle that it brings about. I mean, have you noticed that whenever he draws himself naked?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Essentially, maybe he was a sailor. And that's also like showing in the way that he would inhabit the world, always kind of in transition. Even when he set up the studio in Sydney, he set it up in a boathouse. And I think that's kind of like saying a lot about his nature.
So Rick, who worked on those Bayview houses, Richard LePlastri, I mean, he would say that Utzon would always say, why don't we just go sailing, you know? Today, let's not go to work, let's just go sailing. And, you know, it was part of his life.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Buddhist statement, Zen Buddhist statement, that says something along the lines of, the art, a true master of his art doesn't know whether he is working or play. It's always both. And I think that comes to mind when you think about Utzon's work. I mean, the stories about him like building Lis and sugar cubes, they're all true. He definitely did that. But there's also like a precision to his work and a thoroughness and like an intention to like do things in a deeply thoughtful way, which is also true. So he had both sides of him.
It's amazing to come to the Utzon archive in Aalborg, having been to Lis and having seen the house. And in front of me are what look like the most beautiful and precious drawings done by Utzon in pencil. What are you going to show me?
I want to show you that first, their idea that the people think that Utzon don't make any drawings to build a house. And when you come to the archive, you can see there are a lot of drawings of Lis and a lot of details. All details of the house are drawing. And I think this is the first idea.
And he did all of these drawings himself, these drawings?
Yes.
This is a section, and I want to put in relationship with the archaic temples. Because at the end, I think that Utzon built different little temples, and there are a relationship between the entrance and the edge. Now, for instance, we can compare these two sections. And first, you are outside, enter to a portico, similar to Lis. After entry at the bedroom, and at the end, there are the altar. In this case, the altar is the sea, the sky.
One of the things that modernism tried to do was banish the past, start again, draw a line. And actually, there's so much that joins these two buildings. And I think people misunderstand modernism. They think it is about banishing the past. Because, you know, Lis is a modernist building in many ways, and yet it's so close to something that's pre-modern and ancient.
And the people who are into Lis, they feel the emotion of this building, and they know why they feel this.
You know, here it is like a temple that they filled in below. It's like a ruin that's been occupied, you know. It's like coming to the Acropolis and then somebody has built something underneath it. I like that very much.
Yo creo que los pilares exentos que te marcan el ritmo sí que recuerdan a estas construcciones de los templos griegos que están como enfrente del mar. Por ejemplo, el templo de Apolo.
So the more you look, the more you see. It's like a piece of music. You listen to it 1,000 times and you still hear something new, you know, and you still wonder. And in a way, that's what makes this house so interesting. We keep seeing things and wondering, why like that? It's so slightly unusual.
When we were walking outside, we talked about Utzon being between places, whether it's the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere or Northern Europe or Southern Europe. And although you talked about him settling in Sydney or wanting to settle in Sydney, I think of him as a journeyman, you know, moving through life, moving through the world, accumulating influences. Can you talk to me a little bit about that, how he, or what he saw when he travelled?
I mean, in a way, it started in 47. And just, I mean, well, actually, it started 2 years before that. He, as a young architect, he worked for Alvar Aalto. And after that, he went back to Denmark and he wanted to set up office. But he couldn't get any good projects. So in a couple of years after, he wrote to Alvar Aalto and asked if he could get a job, because he kept ending up in compromise projects. And Alvar Aalto said, I'm working on something. It's interesting, but it's not a very nice place. So I don't have anything for you right now, but I can recommend you. And this is when Utzon begins to travel. And his first trip is to Morocco. And I think based upon his anecdotes from this trip, and certainly also the pictures, it's this idea of architecture's landscape, which is ever so clear in his understanding as an architect. That kind of comes forward. This sense of continuity between the terrain and the building, but also this sense of continuity between the landscape and how you built and how that all comes together. And what he saw was these almost like sandcastles coming straight out of the ground, straight out of the desert. And this idea that people would be constantly maintaining them. And as they were doing so, they were singing, and just outside of the window, they were growing what they were eating, and everything was just kind of linked. And so this is the idea that comes across first.
In Australia, architects who have studied with him, like Richard Le Plestre, talk a lot about, is a building on the ground or of the ground? Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting because architects who knew Utzon, like Glenn Murcutt, mm-hmm. are very much on the ground. They're very distinct from landscape. Although they're still informed by landscape, mm-hmm. they're very distinct in how they settle down on landscape. Whereas, as you say, Utzon's buildings are of the landscape. I mean, I think even the Opera House, you know, where the landscape begins and the building starts, it's a piece of constructed landscape. It's a tapestry. Yeah. And Can Lis is the same. And that's what I see when I look at some of these images in Morocco, is that sense of just moving the ground around and moving it up.
Yeah. 2 years later, he travels to North America, and he kind of starts up north, and then he drives all the way down to the southern states. And there he visited sites like Taos Pueblo and Mesa Verde, these indigenous sites for indigenous architecture. And they're all rammed earth structures or cave architecture or adobe architecture, which is just kind of this continuous mass, and again this strong relationship with the terrain. And then he moves across from Mexico, and then perhaps what you were just talking about begins to become more clear, because he settles in Mexico City, and from there he travels out into the jungle. And he visits these archaeological sites at the time, but these temple sites where people for thousands of years ago have been constructing these primordial temples. And Utzon describes this experience of walking up the steps, step by step by step, and how before, when he was in the jungle, there was no long views, and how it was dense and humid. And then suddenly, when he's standing on top of the platform, his world is transformed. And so, and what he finds interesting is that even though these temples were built for such a long time ago, a modern man could still like walk on top of that platform and have the same feeling of moving from one realm to another. Like this idea that this platform was a threshold that could take you from an everyday world into another place, which was prepared for spiritual aspects of life.
What do you think who are the architects who influence in John Utzon?
So Aalto is, for me, the most important one. I know that he worked for him for a short while. I know that he thought about going back and working for him again, but then he started to travel. And I know that later on, when he had established his own office, he would encourage younger architects who was working with him to go and visit master, he would say. So I know that Aalto played an important role for him as a person, and I think he set an example in terms of an architect who wanted to standardize architecture without losing its character and sense of place and all of these other things that we normally associate with the Nordic approach to modern architecture. So Aalto is important. But then there's also someone like Asplund, of course, and Leverance even. I think Asplund was sort of a pioneer in Nordic architecture. Utzon has an early memory of visiting an exhibition that Asplund and Leverance did in collaborations in Stockholm in the 30s. And he remembered coming home with his family. This is way before he became an architect. And he remembered how they changed everything. All of the old heavy furniture went out and lighter furniture came in. He even remembers how architecture began to become this lively reality and how they would begin to eat differently. So Asplund's important. And sometimes you can even see it in his projects.
Okay. We can think that Aalto is an influence, a very important person to Jon Utzon, the person and the architect. And for instance, to Leverance and Asplund is very important, the projects, no?
Yeah, possibly, yeah. I think another one that's interesting to think about is Frank Lloyd Wright. When Utzon was living in Stockholm, Wright was giving lectures. And I think Wright and his organic approach to modern architecture was something that they were talking about.
So I think what is unexpected for me is coming here, having been to many modernist houses, and one thing I generally don't see in many of those houses is the connection with the world. You know, when I look at the Farnsworth House or maybe some of Le Corbusier's villas, what I don't see is a deep connection with the world in terms of the stuff of landscape, the stuff of people, the stuff of culture. What I see is a set of buildings that are rooted in ideas, and they're very self-contained, they're very insular buildings. When I come here, I see a building that's completely connected to the world of people and culture, and I see his life in Sydney brought here. I see his life in Denmark brought here. I see the life of Majorca. I see the history of Islamic buildings here. And that's an enormous surprise. I hadn't expected just to see this building so bound up in the world of people and places.
Sí, yo creo que Can Lis concentra un interior de Utzon, de todos sus viajes, toda su experiencia en Sydney y todo su aprendizaje de arquitectura durante esos 70, debería tener aproximadamente unos 55, 57 años, ¿no? Entonces Can Lis concentra todo lo que acabas de comentar, Piers, ¿no? Esa arquitectura islámica que visita, esas plataformas que visita en Yucatán, esas clases de meteorología que da en Hawái. Todo esto lo acaba concentrando en esta casa. Vamos a pasar desde los muros con los pinos, esa cueva, esos porches, y de repente llegas aquí y se abre esta gran terraza que se abre a toda la naturaleza y al cosmos. Esa relación con las estrellas, el sol, la luna, las nubes y el mar. Hay una conexión desde la piedra, ¿no? Desde la piedra, esto es piedra de Marets, donde construye la casa, desde la piedra al cosmos.
Aire que surca tus pupilas, roza tu cara, se acerca oigo su voz y su luz que se aleja. Ilumina tu alma, viento de libertad. Se escucha tu silencio dibujando una flor. Quiero volar y soñar junto a ti. Quiero volar y seguirte hasta el fin. Incansable movió las hojas y se eleva hacia las nubes. Este aire me recuerda